And the subject of today is going to be bioprotective cultures and how they work. A little add-on to the introduction, just to get us to know us a little bit better. I'm heading up dairy bioprotection in Hansen. From the commercial side, my background is actually commercial, and I, by coincidence, ended up getting into this beautiful industry of dairy and food 6.5 years ago when I joined Hansen. Coming from a farmer background, there were a few things that suddenly clicked into everything and made sense for me. So I'm enjoying myself in this business and being in dairy. I think it's wonderful. Yeah, you're laughing. You're a dairy
I'm
girl.
laughing. I've actually I've grown up in the dairy world from a dairy family. I have a master's degree in dairy science and a PhD in food spoilage. So I'll also be talking about the technical background of bioprotective cultures.
Yeah, so happy to be within this little enclosed group family of dairy enthusiasts. And we'll hopefully be able to give you some new insights during the webinar today. Cecilia has been working very much with these culture solutions for bioprotection, and she's been developing, she was responsible for developing our latest launches a year or two back, and is of course working on some of the very interesting stuff we are launching coming years here as well. So just a little bit more to what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you, or we're going to give you a bit of introduction into bioprotection. What is bioprotection, just to set the scene. We're going to talk specifically about solutions that inhibit and counter yeast and mold problems in dairy applications. And then for the most exciting part, I think Cecilia will take us through one of the fairly recent discoveries. We've done some publications on it also recently, where we were actually able to identify how exactly these good bacteria work against the yeast and mold spoilage. There's been lots of studies into this in the past, but no one has been able to really pinpoint the main mode of action of these cultures that works against yeast and mold in dairy, and we have. So pretty happy to have Cecilia talk about that. And then we'll, of course, have a chat about what does it mean then. So if you have cultures that can inhibit yeast and mold in dairy products, how can we use that, and how can we extract value of those solutions into our dairy business and our brands. And in addition to this, or as part of this, we'll touch on the food waste agenda, which is an agenda that's very close to our heart, and where we see actually bioprotection being able to play an important role. So we can talk about that. So to set the scene, bioprotection is a natural way to protect against spoilage and harmful contamination in food. And this is just to tell you that what we're looking at, you can find solutions out there that has been out there for years, artificial solutions that are super effective against fighting spoilage and harmful contamination. What we're working with here are, of course, nature's own way of protecting the products, and it gives some obvious benefits in terms of tapping into an ingredient list that is more attractive to consumers. So this is about improving products. It's about keeping products that we produce fresh and safe, and thereby protecting and also building the brand. We'll talk more about that. When we look at bioprotection at large, we're going to zoom in on bioprotection for fermented dairy products. And we're going to talk about bioprotective solutions for fermented milks, yogurts, sour creams, etc. and some cheeses. And we're gonna, as I said in the beginning, we're gonna focus on solutions that have performance against yeast and mold. There are, of course, other target organisms that you can fight with bioprotection, and there are solutions, and we also have solutions in Christian Hansen against, for example, Listeria, and we have solutions also outside dairy. So bioprotection is not limited to dairy, of course. Bioprotection and using good bacteria cultures to keep fruit fresh and safe is also used in other food matrices and other industries. Within Christian Hansen, we work quite a lot in the meat industry. We work in wine, and we work in prepared foods, ready-to-eat meals, etc. But we're gonna focus today on the dairy part, and probably where it all took departure, where we started looking at how we could use fermentation even more than just to create texture and taste and so on. Yeah. And this is what we're going to talk about. And Cecilia will show more pictures and more examples of performance. But just to set the stage, we're going to talk about a solution that with a culture solution with bacteria that you can add together with the starter culture, so that you have a mix of cultures that give protection to your products. And in this picture, you see a test where a challenge test where yogurt was made with bioprotective cultures and without. Obviously, with the ones in the bottom row are the ones with bioprotective cultures, and the top row is without. And then they were spiked with different types of molds in each column, and they were kept for the same amount of time in the same conditions. And as you can see, the bottom row, the molds were suppressed or delayed. The growth was delayed quite a lot compared to the other rows. And this is the kind of function that we are looking for. When we talk about bioprotection, it's not that it's a completely new concept. Fermentation is a traditional way to keep food fresh for longer. The food categories, the fermented milk categories, the cheeses were originally invented because we experienced that you could actually keep the nutritional value of the food for longer if they fermented in a good way. And this is what we base our research on. We take departure in those traditional fermentation techniques. And I'd say what has changed quite a lot the last 6-7 years is the performance, the amount of additional protection you get. So compared to just the normal fermentation, the middle row is an example of an earlier product in the market, not from Christian Hansen, but from another company, a product that has been in the market for quite a while. So an example of some of the first commercial bioprotective cultures that had some effect, and it delayed a little bit additional compared to just using a starter culture. But we've really moved quite far now with performance to a level where you can really use it to extend shelf life. You can really use it if you are going clean label from artificial preservatives and so on. And that's of course why it's now much more interesting to look at. From a technical point of view. And then I'll hand it over to you, Cecilia, to take us through a little bit of the applications. What applications do we see it working, and what is the effect we see?
Yes, yeah. So I'll dig a little bit more into also how the bioprotective cultures work. And as Peter said, we will focus on the fermented dairy applications in this presentation, also because the mode of action of bioprotective cultures differs depending on what target organism we are trying to inhibit, and also which matrix the cultures are working in. But I'll return to especially the matrix part. This is just to show that the dairy bioprotected cultures inhibiting yeast and molds, they work across many different types of dairy applications, all fermented dairy applications. So it's everything from a yogurt, but also into some of the cheeses, for example, the pasta filata cheese. And there's three main things that are important for the bioprotected cultures to work. First of all, they need to work in a milk base. They need to take part of a fermentation, meaning that there should also be a starter culture present in the product, which are decreasing the pH. And they need to be alive in the final product, meaning that in products like cream cheese, for example, with a high thermization or heat treatment, they will not have an effect because we really need to have the live bacteria in the matrix throughout the full shelf life to have an effect. It also means that bioprotected cultures works throughout the full shelf life of the product. But I'll return to these three things when I'm describing the mode of action more in details and also explaining why it is important that they are alive, why they have a fermentation and so on. But first, I'll just give a few examples of the performance of bioprotected cultures in the different types of products. And this is an example in stirred yogurt. And normally when we are evaluating the performance of a bioprotected culture, both against the yeast and against the molds, as you see here, we are evaluating against a range of yeast or molds. And here on the pictures, you see 3 different molds on the top and 3 different molds on the bottom pictures. We are always having a reference without any protection in, and then we are comparing to the products with the bioprotected culture or comparing to products with chemical preservatives, for example. And the reason why we are looking at a range of contaminants is to ensure that there is a good protection against not just one, but all the different types of molds, for example, we would meet in the dairy industry. And it's most often penicillium which are causing issues in dairy products, or at least in fermented dairy products. And from the pictures here, you are seeing that also growth on the plates or the yogurt samples where we have bioprotected culture inside. And it actually illustrates very well that when we are adding a bioprotected culture, we are not killing the contaminants. We are delaying the growth of the contaminants. So it is a growth delaying effect and not a fungicidal effect that we are seeing. It also means when we are doing challenge tests, as illustrated here, we are really challenging the cultures. So we are testing the cultures under conditions where we know that the molds, for example, are growing very well, and under conditions where we know that we will eventually see growth, or very likely see growth, also in the samples with the bioprotected cultures, to really evaluate what is the difference between the products without and the products with the bioprotected culture. But as you can see, that even though we are challenging our cultures and we're really making the molds grow or have the best conditions, there is a huge delaying effect when having the bioprotected cultures present in the product. Another example is for the yeasts, and where molds, they are spoiling the products by having visual growth on the surface of the product. Yeasts are mainly inside of the product, and it's a question of cell counts. And for a consumer to perceive the product as spoiled, we need cell counts of 10 to 5, 10 to 6 CFU per gram in the product. And again, here you see that we have a range of different types of yeast. They are different in how aggressively they grow and also how difficult they are to inhibit. But even for the Yarovia lipolytica, which you see to the right, you will see that there is a difference. And actually the difference before they reach the 10 to 6 is 5 to 7 days delay in the growth. And of course, this would be much, much larger if we had not been challenging by adding high levels of yeast counts or applying a lot of oxygen to the sample. And that's just some of the examples how we are making the yeast grow even better.
So when you work with customers and you see in a challenge test, maybe you made this challenge test in the customer's product, and yes, and then they are seeing 5 days delay in the challenge test. Does it mean that they can then expand their shelf life with 5 days?
No, so challenge test also because we are challenging the bioprotective cultures, and we are actually, it's an underestimation of the performance. We cannot translate delay directly from a challenge test to real life situation, because the initial yeast contamination, for example, will be much lower. The available oxygen will be much lower, and so on. So to really evaluate the performance in a real life situation, we need to do field trials in the specific product with the specific contaminants and so on over a longer period of time. So no, we cannot translate. We can use challenge tests to show performance and to show if one culture, for example, is performing better than another culture, but it cannot be translated into shelf life extension, for example.
So the 5 days would be much more in real life.
Yes.
And I think that expertise around not just showing that it works in theory in the lab, those are the pictures we're looking at here today, right? But most importantly, when you implement and work with bioprotective cultures, it's really to think about how to trial it in real life, in the real conditions, and see what you can get from it. And that's just key, also to partner up with some good people in that process.
And that's why I really try to emphasize that these are challenge tests, where we are where it's very easy to illustrate the performance, but yes, to really test it in your own applications.
Yeah, I remember when I came into Chr. Hansen 6 years ago, and we worked with customers, this was often something that we found in the projects, that okay, we showed that it worked nice in the lab, and then in real life it was quite difficult for the customer always to see, does it actually work? Because when it works, you can't see it, right? Then your products are just good. And because your contamination is never constant, you never really know, right? And that's I think something that we have advanced a lot on, and with many customers we now work very differently. So a challenge test can of course be kind of a proof of concept comparative study, but then the real work goes on in trials and over a longer period, where customers would measure decreasing complaints, decreasing scrap, or the additional shelf life. Right?
In general, our recommendation is to use the normal QC measures to evaluate the performance of a bioP culture.
Yeah,
we could have a whole webinar just about
that.
This topic. So we'll continue.
Yeah.
This is just again to illustrate some of the other product types that was also mentioned on the previous slide. So for example, sour cream, there's an example here of white cheese and of cottage cheese. And it's just to show that we see a good performance of bioprotective cultures across all these different types of applications. And the last example here is a pasta filata example, which is the one differing the most from the other ones, because it's a harder cheese, you can say. And also here it works. But of course in the pasta filata, that's one of the examples where we have to be aware of the heat treatment during the stretching, for example, that it cannot be higher than allowing for the bacteria to survive the stretching part.
And that'll also become more obvious when you talk about the mode of action, why that is.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it works across many of our dairy applications. And it is mainly because of this milk matrix that's really key for our bioprotective cultures to work. And I'll return to this. Yes. So as Peter also introduced, the use of bioprotective cultures is not a new invention. Actually, the use of starter cultures itself is, you could argue, some type of bioprotective cultures, because they have been decreasing the pH and thereby inhibiting all of the pathogenic bacteria. So already there we do have some protection of the food product. What bioprotective cultures does more is that they do not just lower the pH and use this part of the fermentation to inhibit unwanted microorganisms. The bioprotective cultures are adding more to the protection, and thereby also inhibiting yeast and molds, which actually do not care about the low pH coming from the starter culture. It is the tradition of fermentation, so also the bioprotective cultures, which are lactic acid bacteria, just like the starter cultures, they are, besides of decreasing the pH, they are also using other mechanisms to inhibit the unwanted yeast and mold, specifically in this case. And of course, there have been, when developing bioprotective cultures, we are screening the lactic acid bacteria for those, to find those which are having this very specific effect. But we're actually also screening for lactic acid bacteria which does not have a big impact on the product characteristics themselves. So lactic acid bacteria which does not have big impact on flavor or texture, because we want all the product characteristics to come from the starter culture, and then the bioprotective culture should only add, you can say, the antifungal activity in this case.
Yeah, and of course they never only add that.
No.
So it is going to be used together with the normal starter. It's going to be a mix in the starter culture, and in that sense, it of course interacts as well, right? So I think it's fair to say that we always, when we work with customers, advise to very initially look at how does it affect the product, and we haven't showed our range, but you would actually be surprised. We have quite a lot of different bioprotective cultures with the same functionality for yogurt, and we often get the question, why do you have so many? And that's actually the answer is that we do see that sometimes there is an interaction, sometimes there is a slight impact on sensory, and for that reason we've been able to see that, or we have seen that some versions fit better for some cases, for some mixes of yogurts or other products, and some work better in others. So quite often we would work with a customer not just with one solution from the start, but maybe the customer would test 2 or 3 to see which one fits best into the sensory profile of the product. Most of the cases we find a solution that doesn't make any significant difference in the product, but it can have. And in some cases, there's also a positive impact we're seeing, right? But I think if you look at the boundaries, when we are developing, or the development within bioprotective cultures, both from us and so on, but the boundaries that we are trying to work with is both the performance, as you are saying, against yeast and mold, and then it's the fit to application. I don't want to say less sensory impact or no sensory impact, because I think it's more fit to application, where we try to tailor more and more to the specific needs and to the specific palates and conditions, and so if you look at our R&D program, it's both around screening, and it's about developing rapid screening where we can screen for this particular performance in the right matrix very fast. And that's why we are able to find something that works better than what we've seen before and move that boundary. But it's definitely also the application piece of it, understanding how it can fit into the application and doing lots of work there to really identify the right ones. So it has to be a symbiosum of those things. Yeah.
And I think it will surprise many, knowing that how much time we're actually also spending on the last part. So making it fit to the specific application and making sure that it works very well with the starter cultures and the matrix itself. Yes. Yeah.
And it's the beauty of nature. If it was easier, then it would have been a chemical, and no one wants that. So fermentation is natural, and that's why it's interesting. And sometimes stuff happens that we didn't foresee.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that leads me to the specific mode of action of our cultures. actually researchers both in industry and in academia, of course, has been looking for the specific mode of action for decades already. Until now, it has been a little bit blurry what was the specific mechanism. Most researchers have been looking for one mode of action which could explain the full effect of the bioactive cultures. A lot of research projects has also identified natural metabolites such as diacetyl, phenolactic acid, or smaller peptides as being responsible for some of the antifungal activity, but none of these compounds which has been identified are being produced in high enough levels in dairy products to explain the full effect which is seen against yeast and molds in these applications. A lot of publications have also been pointing at the weak organic acids produced by the lactic acid bacteria, also the starter culture, but specifically also by the bioactive culture, such as lactic acid, acetic acid, and so on, to have impact on the inhibition of the yeast and the molds. And for sure, the weak organic acids, they do also have a saying, but just like with the natural metabolites, they are not produced in high enough levels to explain the full mode of action of the bioactive cultures. And then, of course, lastly, there has been a lot of discussions that, of course, a competition for nutrients also have an impact, because the lactic acid bacteria are present in relatively high numbers, and they are competing against the yeast and the molds and competing for the nutrients. But until very recently, no one was able to point at which nutrients are being competed for in the matrix, and why is it the competition of nutrients so important, or why is it important? Also meaning that until very recently, it has been agreed, and it is still agreed, that it's not one mode of action which is explaining the full effect against yeast and mold, but it's a combination of many different mode of actions. So production of different metabolites, production of different organic acids, and of course also the competition for nutrients. Until very recently, yes.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that all the main studies that have focused on that some metabolites must be produced, which has an inhibitory effect.
Yes.
Because that was maybe the most obvious thinking, that would be the mode of action.
It's both the most obvious thinking that something must be produced which are inhibiting the yeast and the molds. It's also the easiest thing to look for when you're doing research. It's much easier to find something that's being produced than to find something which is present in small levels and which are being.
And researchers have identified some metabolites that could have inhibitory effect, but when they then tested the level, the amount of metabolite produced, and testing how much of the inhibitory effect could be explained, it was minor, right? So all studies until now, yes, there is some, and it has a little effect, but it's minor. And because of that, we all agree, okay, there's more to it. So it must also be something about competition, something about organic acids, and a combination of things.
But very recently, actually this year, we from Hansen published a publication showing the mode of action, because there is actually one major mode of action which can explain most of the activity coming from the bioactive cultures, and it's a question of competition for nutrients. And we have identified the compound which are being competed for, and it's manganese. And manganese is actually a compound which all microorganisms are needing at different levels. For example, the lactic acid bacteria are using it as a stress mechanism. So, for example, when there's a low pH, they can be using the manganese to survive in this stressful environment. And so does the yeast and the mold. They also need the manganese to grow and develop in the environments, in the dairy products. Manganese is present in relatively low levels in milk compared to many other food products. And the bioactive cultures, they have been shown to have a very active uptake or transporter to take up the manganese. Actually, they have several transporters, and so does many lactic acid bacteria, but they have especially one, the MNTH transporter, which is very active at low pH values. And this is also why we need to have a fermentation of the product and a decrease in the pH for the transporter to be working the best, you can say. And the MNTH transporter is taking up the manganese and collecting it in the cells of the bioprotective cultures, meaning that the manganese is being scavenged and it's not longer available for the yeast and the mold to take it up, and thereby the yeast and the molds are delayed in the growth, and they have difficulties in general to grow because of the very, very low levels of manganese left in the dairy products. So you can say it's relatively simple. It's a question of a small nutrients that they all need, and the bioprotective cultures are simply better at taking up and faster at taking up the manganese compared to the yeast and the molds. Yes. And there has of course been a lot of studies to show that the manganese uptake was not just another minor mechanism, but it actually is the major mechanism and the major reason why the bioprotective cultures have this very good effect in delaying the growth of yeast and molds. And this is an example from some studies which was done in collaboration with NC State University, where the MNTH gene was knocked out. So what you see here on the top right side is an example of yeast growth with in a culture where in a sample where the culture had the MNTH transporter present, and you see that there was almost no growth of the yeast, and in another sample where the culture had knocked out the transporter, and you see that without the transporter, without the uptake of the manganese, the yeast is growing without any issues. In the bottom, that's an example of another study where instead of just knocking out the transporter, there was also added a lot of manganese to the product. So the blue bar is an example of a product where the cultures, they have the transporter available, but they simply too high levels of manganese present for the cells itself to take up all the manganese and thereby delay the growth of the yeast. And you see there's plenty of growth of the yeast. And then of course, if the transporter is not present, the yeast grows very well also with the red bar. So it is really a question of the bioprotective cultures being able to take up the manganese and thereby delay the growth of the yeast and the molds. Another example, and this is a more visual example, it's both in a yogurt and in a white brine cheese, where we have a reference product without any bioprotective culture. Then we have products where the bioprotective culture has been added, just like the pictures I showed you in the beginning of the presentation. And you see that there is a good delaying effect. And then the last example in the blue box, that's where we have taken exactly the same products, but we have added manganese to the product. So there was a high levels of manganese available. And then you see that then there is both enough manganese for the molds to grow and obviously also for the bioprotective cultures. And this is why, it's very important that the cultures works in a milk matrix, because it's special for milk that they have these low levels of manganese. And this is also why this mode of action specifically works in milk products or in fermented milk products, because it's possible for the bioprotective cultures to scavenge all of the manganese being present and thereby delaying the growth. I also mentioned in the beginning that the bioprotective cultures, they need to take part in the fermentation. As I said, the transporter, which is taking up the manganese, is mostly or mainly active at low pH values. So we need to have a fermentation of the product before the bioprotective cultures really start to be active. And therefore the bioprotective culture is also not affecting the starter culture, because first the starter culture is doing its work, it's fermenting the product, decreasing the pH, determining the texture and so on. And then when the pH is sufficiently low, then the bioprotective culture starts to take up the manganese and thereby delay the growth. And the last part was the biotoxicologist had to be alive in the final product. And it's because during the shelf life of the product, they continue to take up the manganese. Of course, over time, cells are dying, they are lysing, and then they are giving the manganese free again, you can say. But then the new cells will just immediately take it up again, and the effect of the biotoxicology will be retained throughout the full shelf life if the cells are alive.
So while this is really a breakthrough and it's super exciting, it's unfortunately and luckily, I don't know, it depends on how you see it, also clear that this is not the one and only truth, right? So the mode of action is really linked to the matrix.
Yes.
Here it's a competition for manganese. Could you imagine that it would be, in other cases, competition for other nutrients?
Yes,
yeah,
for sure.
And in this particular case here, the reason why manganese is the key is that it is actually there in so limited amounts from the start. So the same box would take up equal amount of manganese in another food type, but if that food type had loads of manganese, it wouldn't show it wouldn't show the bioprotective performance, right? So I think that's just super exciting, and I think that's also changed a little bit, the change in the way to look at mode of action, where especially people looking into metabolites being produced and so on, they're looking more of kind of a universal truth that where it will work everywhere, right? But I think our starting point is definitely the matrix, and we've had that hunch from the start, and it's been confirmed here that you have to look for solutions for the specific matrix, and you have to start with that matrix.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's also super interesting, I think, that it's not something that's being produced. It is actually really a question of competition and the natural way of competing against each other and being the most powerful, you can say. And in this case, it's the bioprotective culture, which are winning the competition.
Yeah.
When this is said, it's still, and that's also why I'm returning to this picture, it is still a combination of different mechanisms, because of course they are being produced diacetyl, for example, which has some effect. There are being produced weak organic acids, which also has some effect. But what we can see is that the main effect is coming from the competition, and specifically in milk, from the competition of manganese. And of course, then if we move into other food products, the mode of action might be a competition for something else, which is very essential for the yeast and molds to grow. But in milk, it's the manganese which is the important nutrient, which they are competing for.
Yeah. And actually, that was a great layover to what I was going to say next here. You said you are happy that it is actually this competition. It seems to be a supernatural element of or mode of action, and this fits very well to the main reason for looking at bioprotection from a dairy point of view, right? So why is it that also before we knew this discovery, why is it that bioprotection was interesting, and why is it that the demand has been increasing like crazy for it? It's of course that the idea of protecting our fermented products with just a different culture mix, with adding more of an ingredient that we're already adding, the lactic acid bacteria, instead of adding artificial stuff that has to be declared and that no one likes. Well, you have to declare cultures as well, but it is on the label already in these products. So it's really a nice story. And I think understand that has been one of the reasons why we really have continued to look into the mode of action, is that of course in the long run we want to know how they work, both to be able to develop more and better products, but also to just underline our knowledge on why this is a natural phenomenon. And if you're looking at that, I think the competition for nutrients is the mode of action that is most easy to explain to to lay people and most acceptable as a natural way of working, where production of metabolites could, in some cases, if it was at levels that were very high, be questionable. Is this really natural, and what is the difference between artificial preservatives and this solution? So from that standpoint, the discovery is also quite important. And it's an important discovery that we and I also know a lot of our customers when having dialogues with retailers, when communicating to consumers and regulators, we try to use this discovery as well to show why it's a natural phenomenon. So using bioprotective cultures, you can use it for many different things, and one of the starting points can of course be that you want to be more attractive to consumers. You want to take out an ingredient that consumers would rather like not to have on the products, and then stay in the same great shelf life or even further. So, and it's about keeping quality. And Cecilia, I included this slide because I just wanted to emphasize one thing that I knew you were going to come up with. You are saying that they are alive throughout the shelf life, and you said, and that also means that they work throughout the shelf life, which means that it's not only a possible contamination that happened in your dairy at the packing end or filling lines and in the process, or a yeast that was sitting somewhere in a pipe in the corner. It's not only that contamination that we will delay, it's also contamination happening in the usage phase. And we see quite a lot of dairies with extremely good quality and the best brands and the best quality in the world, looking at this reason for using bioprotection. So to secure the open shelf life and give consumers an even better experience, making the products more robust for contamination that could also happen in the usage phase at the consumer end or in the service business in big buckets and tubs there. So it makes products more robust also within the shelf life, and increases quality there. And then of course there's also a lot of customers looking for bioprotection to be able to go further with their products, who might have great quality today in a specific shelf life, but who are seeing reasons to improve shelf life. A lot of customers looking at export opportunities, where just to go there they would need more shelf life, but maybe also looking at going into markets where the cold chain is not necessarily as optimal as it is in their home market, and to secure those investments in setting up export business and setups, having this additional quality hurdle into your system, like all the other hurdles you've put into the system. This can help and make the product more robust for that. So when you are delaying yeast and mold spoilage, can you talk a little bit about, Cecilia, this graph here? Of course, if a customer and a dairy have issues with yeast and mold, we are able to, with these type of cultures, to bring that level of problems down, to delay that spoilage so that you could have a good enough shelf life. Yeah. But what about customers who don't have problems on a daily basis? What can they do?
Now I am not sure what you're fishing for. But of course, since the cultures are delaying the outgrowth of the yeast and the molds, and most customers will not have yeast and mold issues on a daily basis, meaning that they'll have a relatively low contamination level, and the lower contamination level there is, the better effect they will also see from the bioprotective cultures. And if they in general have a low contamination level, but they can use the biopsy cultures for us to extend the shelf life of the products. So they will, by adding the biopsy cultures, they will be able to extend it actually even more than if they had had a higher level of the yeast and mold contamination. Of course, since it is a competition, the more yeast and mold you have from the beginning, the more it's also easier for them to grow and to compete with the lactic acid bacteria. Yes.
That was exactly what I was fishing for.
Good.
Yeah, because I think this is a conversation that we often have. First of all, just pinpointing, bioprotection is not a silver bullet, right? So it's not that it will eliminate the spoilage. It makes it grow slower.
And Peter actually mentioned it before as well, that the bioprotective culture is an extra hurdle you're adding to the product. So it works together with the good cold chain, together with the good hygienic measures that you're already doing in the products. And of course, the lower temperature you're storing the products at, the better works the bioprotective cultures as well. So it is an extra hurdle.
The better the starting point, the better the conditions, the more you get out of it actually. Yes. And then you can, then the sky is the limit. And we have customers who have fermented dairy products without any sort of artificial stuff that has 90 or 100 days shelf life in the greatest conditions, right? So it's really interesting. And of course, the more challenged, both storage conditions, cold chain in the value chain, and the higher the starting level of contamination, the shorter the shelf life you can still expect, but you will have a delay that can actually mean something. So with the additional shelf life, there could be many reasons for looking into this. I talked about exporting, of course, expanding markets. We also see customers, of course, looking into this in order to optimize production efficiencies, have less changeovers, bigger runs, logistics. And we do see an increasing number of discussions around food waste. In Europe, the discussion on food waste is extremely fierce, and it's a very big subject also in the consumer mindset today. And we see that the entire discussion, where in dairy products before, everyone was just talking about having the as fresh product as possible, milk from the cow yesterday and on my table today, where actually the food waste subject is changing this dialogue a little bit. And it changes the way people look at shelf life and look at extending shelf life as well. So quite a lot of dairies are taking up that opportunity now. I'll be a little bit quick here on the last couple of slides so that we have enough time to answer a couple of the questions here. But just highlighting that also in Australia, food waste is obviously on the agenda. There's way too much, 20% of food wasted, 4 million tons. And it's a large amount of money. Waste is waste, and no one benefits from it. So it is in our common interest to reduce it. And don't forget the differentiation possibility. And I'll touch on that now. We've done many studies on how consumers accept solutions where bioprotective cultures have been used. Here's just one study where on the left side we did it was in Germany, we did a blind tasting of products, a sensory test of products, and it showed that products that were tasted at the end of a normal shelf life without bioprotective cultures, and products that were tasted at the end of an extended shelf life, I think it was extended with 1 week here in this case, the consumers like those two products at the end of shelf life equally much. So no difference there. What was even more interesting was that when we were also testing in this, what about their perception when we informed them about the shelf life? And we informed them why the shelf life hadn't been increased. So we tried to say, what if they know that we are increasing shelf life to help reduce food waste? How will they perceive this? And it confirmed that what we were all already thinking. It confirmed that actually the consumers in Germany, in this case, were suddenly willing to buy this product more often than the consumers than the normal product with normal shelf life. So if we inform them about why we are doing it, if we tie it together with a food waste story, then our products become more attractive, and it can be a differentiation possibility. So I think that's pretty interesting to see how extending shelf life suddenly turns into a subject that's okay to talk about, and it could even be a differentiator, a positive differentiator. We are seeing the dairy world and food world do a lot of measures at the moment. And just one example, which goes a little bit in this direction, is that and it started in Scandinavia and Norway, but it's now actually rolling into many European countries, where we not only have best before dates on products, on dairy products anymore, but it actually says best before, but often good after. And then we see dairies campaigning how you as a consumer should not throw out products just because it exceeded the best before date, but you should look at it, you should smell it, you should maybe have a little taste before you throw it out. You should use your senses to evaluate the quality. And this is, of course, helping also to change the whole perception around shelf life and when are products good. It also puts pressure on actually making sure you have good products also at the very end of shelf life, obviously. But this does change a lot of things. I think in Australia you still have use by dates. If any of you are in any forums where you could influence those discussions, I would say one of the first actions to help reduce food waste would be to change that to best before rather than used by, right? Fermented dairy products doesn't really make sense to have a use by, because fermentation is beautiful and you can often have good quality also after. And the differentiation opportunity is there because we as consumers do look at this as an opportunity. We do, when we shop in our supermarkets, actually start choosing brands that are more sustainable, that are communicating about sustainability. And that's the new opportunity that lies in here. It's not only shelf life extension to optimize your own setups, your own logistics, your own productions. It's not only to benefit you and the retailers. It's actually something that you can use branding wise as well. Last example on that is this one, where we tested a non-branded yogurt with this kind of concept, where we informed about the food waste reduction potential of the longer shelf life. And we also talked about how it was just a very simple ingredient mix: milk, fruit, and sugar and culture. And the concept was tested in a standard test setup from the company Kantar. And it was tested here in Spain and Italy, and it tested actually with consumers with a representative amount of consumers in those two countries. It tested in the top 25% benchmark. So meaning compared to similar products that have been tested in this setup in the yogurt category, it came out as a product that if I was a dairy, I would be just doing the small tweaks now and putting into the market. So really a product that that consumers want and that can differentiate. I think we'll leave it there and try to go to the questions. I will just put up the chat box here for us to see the questions.
Right, so if you've got more questions, please type them in. We're running a little bit low on time, but we'll probably go a couple of minutes over to get through the questions. Thanks, Peter.
Okay, so one here says, hello, in your challenge trial, you showed different effectiveness of the bioprotective culture against specific yeast and mold species. Does that mean that manganese requirements differ between various yeast and mold species?
Yes, this is for sure one of the reasons why we see that different yeast and molds have different, we call it sensitivity towards the bioprotective culture. They have different requirement for manganese to be able to grow. It's not the only explanation. They also differ in how aggressively they grow, how much they the environment, the temperature, for example, the oxygen, how much this impacts the growth of the specific yeast or mold. But of course, the manganese is part of the explanation.
And another one, hi, thanks for the valuable information. What progress has been made towards the use of bioprotective cultures in non-fermented application, for example, custards and desserts?
It is, of course, something that we are also looking at. It depends very much on the target organism. So if it comes to yeast and molds, to my knowledge, there is no cultures on the market today which are inhibiting yeast and molds. When it comes to other types of target organisms, for example, listeria, there is products on the market already which are inhibiting listeria. So it depends very much on the target organism.
And it's of course more difficult to find, or it's likely that it's more difficult to find something that both has an inhibitory effect against something, but then also doesn't change the properties of the food too much, right?
Adding lactic acid bacteria to most food products will lower the pH and thereby change the sensory of the food product.
But it's a very good question, and for sure there is a gold nugget there of potential if we are able to find something that works there, and it's also one of the roads we are looking into. Another question, Cecilia, how long on average does it take for you to work with a company to determine how this product can work to extend shelf life of a product?
It's a very good question. And it depends very much on the quality of the product, so the starting point of the product. In general, when doing field trials or longer term trials, my recommendation is if you have high challenges with yeast and mold, so you know that you in relatively short time will be able to see a difference, then you can do trials for a shorter time. If you only have issues with yeast and molds every 3 months, for example, then of course you need to run trials for a period long enough to also ensure that you're testing in the times where you will have issues with yeast and molds. So it depends very much on the starting point and also your gut feeling. How much data do you want before you decide on extending the shelf life? What we normally recommend is that you use the bioP cultures for a period of time, for example, 3 months. You keep your normal shelf life and then you spend or use this time to evaluate on the batches how long can you actually extend the shelf life.
But just on a very practical level, I think just from the top of my mind, I remember cases, even in Australia, cases where it was a 2-week trial and they immediately saw the difference and were able to extend. And then you have cases where we work with a customer for the 3 months and very thorough data on consumer feedback and so on came into play. And
when Peter says 2 weeks, it's of course 2 weeks of production, for example, because we need to follow the product for the full shelf life.
Sure.
That's the first timeline that needs to be in place.
Yeah. And the last question here is, how active is the metabolism of these bioprotective cultures under refrigeration? Is the competition for manganese less effective under cooler storage conditions through shelf life?
The competition is actually more effective under refrigeration conditions, not because of the activity of the bioprotective culture, but because of the activity of the yeast and the molds. So they are already challenged in their growth because of the lower temperature, and therefore they even need the manganese even more, and they will be even more challenged by the lack of manganese. And it comes back to the hurdle effect. So the more hurdles you're adding to the product, the better effect you will have. The lactic acid bacteria, they are taking up the manganese regardless of the temperature. So they will also at refrigeration take up the conditions, take up the manganese and inhibit the growth or delay the growth.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Jenny, I think that was the last question.
Yeah, thank you so much to Peter and Cecilia. Thank you all for attending today. I just want to have a disclaimer that we've been very fortunate to have Christian Hansen present for us today. They are by no means the only culture providers in Australia, and you're welcome to explore other avenues. But should you wish to chat further with Christian Hansen, Peter has just popped the slide up there. So thank you, Peter and Cecilia, so much for all the effort you have put into today. And thanks everybody for attending. I'm getting some very good feedback there. I will be sending out a link, folks, for you to provide feedback, and greatly appreciate if you can do that. So we'll say cheerio. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Lots of thank yous coming up there in the chat box.